Welcome back to the channel, where true horror meets the shadows of our faith. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tonight's story is one of the darkest we've ever told. This is the true tale of a man who believed redemption could be earned through pain, who joined the tradition of Holy Week crucifixion in a quiet Philippine town, hoping to wash away a lifetime of guilt. But when the wounds bled deeper than they should, and shadows began whispering his name, it became clear something else had been waiting. Every Sunday, without fail, my uncle would take me and my cousins to church. It didn't matter if it was pouring rain or the kind of heat that melted asphalt. He was always there, in his faded jeans, his worn-out slippers, and a crucifix tattooed across his throat. After Mass, he'd always buy us dirty ice cream from the vendor outside the church gates. It was a tradition, a ritual in itself. People in our barangay used to joke that my uncle was halfway to heaven because of how often he prayed. But they also whispered things they didn't say in front of him, about the tattoos that snaked around his body, about the scars that weren't accidents, and about what he used to be. To most, he was a reformed man, a religious one, but to me, he was something else entirely, something I couldn't fully understand. His house was unlike any other. Not because it was big, it wasn't. It was a humble bungalow, but inside, every wall was covered with relics. Statues of saints stood in every corner, their eyes watching in silence. Candles, even when unlit, left behind the scent of burnt wax. A small altar sat in the living room, always dressed in fresh flowers. My uncle prayed every morning and every night, and sometimes in between. But the most terrifying thing I ever saw as a child was what he did during Holy Week. First, I thought he was pretending. I was 8 when I saw it for the first time. I had just finished my mango ice cream and followed my cousins out to the town square. That's where I saw him, bare-chested, barefoot, carrying a wooden cross on his shoulders like it was part of his spine. His back was bloody, the skin torn. He was barefoot, walking over gravel, eyes fixed forward. Then he lay down on a plank of wood and a man, another devotee, raised a hammer. I screamed before the nail even touched his palm. I thought he was going to die. I ran away crying, not understanding why my uncle would let himself be nailed like Christ. He came home days later with his hand wrapped in gauze, still swollen. My cousins told me it was normal, that he did it every year, but I never forgot it. Years later, when I was old enough to ask without crying, I confronted him. "Uncle, why do you do it?" He looked up from the rosary in his hands. His tattoos peeked out from beneath his barong. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he told me a story I wish I could forget. He was in his early 30s, and by then, he had already been the leader of a gang that ran most of our town's underground business. Drugs, prostitution, extortion, murder. He didn't sugarcoat it. He told me the truth. How they beat people until they begged for death. How they set fire to shops that didn't pay them. How he ordered executions like it was business. He said he felt nothing, until one Holy Week. It was a Friday night. They had just finished drinking when gunshots rang out from an alley near the main road. It was an ambush, rival gangs, coming for blood. They tried to run, but they were surrounded. His men scattered. He was shot in the arm and collapsed in a dead-end alley beside a pile of garbage. Blood soaked his shirt. He thought it was over, and that was when, for the first time in his life, he prayed. He said it wasn't even a proper prayer, just words. "Please, I'm sorry, I don't want to die, please." And then someone stepped into the alley. He described him like this, glowing, hair to the shoulders, robes that didn't look stained despite the filth around him. The man didn't speak. He just knelt beside him, placed a hand on his wound, and closed his eyes. The pain stopped instantly, and then the man whispered only once, "If you wish to live, you must carry the cross every year as I did, so others may be saved from the life you led." Then he disappeared, and minutes later the police arrived. Somehow they didn't see him. They walked past him and caught the other gang members and their rivals. My uncle lay in that alley, bleeding but alive, invisible to both police and enemies. He walked home before sunrise. That was 20 years ago. Every Holy Week since, he carried that cross. He let nails pierce his hands. He bled in public. He said it was the only way he could live with himself. But some of our neighbors weren't so convinced. They whispered that it wasn't Jesus who saved him, that it couldn't be. Nowhere in the Bible does it say Jesus asks for yearly pain, they muttered. That's not divine. That's penance twisted into something darker. I didn't want to believe them. I still don't. But something happened that changed everything. Something that made me wonder whether my uncle's salvation came with a cost. It started the day before Easter, the year I gave birth to my second child. And it began with a woman who vanished from the back of a moving Jeep. They say birth and death are connected by invisible strings, that one cannot come into the world without brushing against something trying to leave it. I never believed that, not until the night I gave birth to my second son, Jim, on the eve of Easter Sunday, inside a moving jeepney with a woman who should not have been there. Her face still haunts me, but let me start at the beginning. My name is Erlene. I was 26 then, a single mother abandoned by the man I thought I'd grow old with, Ireneo. He left while I was 3 months pregnant, disappeared without a word, without a peso, without even looking back at me or our first son, who was barely 3 years old. People call that ghosting now. I call it cowardice. He went back to his province in Sorsogon, and the only way I knew that was because one of his cousins let it slip on Facebook a month later. I wanted to curse him, to march to his house and scream, but my growing belly reminded me that I didn't have the luxury to chase ghosts. March 20th, 2005 was my due date. I remember it clearly because it was Palm Sunday. I had been praying every night at our local chapel, asking God to make the delivery safe. If not for me, then at least for my unborn child. March 20th came and went. So did the 21st. The 22nd. Nothing. The OB said it was normal. Some women deliver 2 weeks early, some 2 weeks late, but there was something unsettling in the silence of my womb, as if Jim was waiting, hesitating. On the eve of Easter Sunday, the pain began. It wasn't a steady rhythm. It came like thunderclaps, violent, erratic. I woke up at midnight and screamed for my parents. We had moved back into their home during the last month of my pregnancy, just in case something like this happened. Papa called Kuya Jonel, our neighbor who owned a jeepney and often volunteered to drive pregnant women to the hospital during emergencies. He arrived 10 minutes later. Mama and Papa flanked me as we climbed into the back of the Jeep. I was sandwiched between them, my legs trembling from the pain. Jonel's wife had placed a mattress and an extra towel inside the Jeep's cabin. As the engine started, we were about to leave the barangay when a woman stepped into the road. She didn't wave, didn't speak, just stood there in the dark, lit by the headlights, one hand held up as if blessing the vehicle. Jonel slowed, rolled down his window. "Emergency pa," he said. "Buntis. Manganganak na." But the woman stepped forward. "I'm going to the hospital too," she said, almost too calmly. Jonel glanced at my parents. Before anyone could answer, she climbed into the front seat, beside the driver. I barely noticed her at first. I was in too much pain, but something about her felt off. She didn't speak a word during the ride, didn't move, didn't flinch when I cried out, when my water broke, or when Mama began praying aloud. The novena of the Holy Wounds, something she had memorized from years of desperate devotion. That's when the woman turned, slowly, smiling, too widely. Mama's hand trembled. She clutched the novena booklet tighter and whispered louder. The names of saints rolled from her lips. Saint Michael, Saint Gabriel, Saint Raphael, Saint Jude, and then the woman moved, or rather jerked, like something inside her recoiled. Her smile vanished. She turned to face the windshield again. Then she was gone. No one saw her fall. There was no sound, no slam of the door, just absence. I blinked and realized she was no longer in the seat. "Mama, where's the woman?" I asked. They didn't answer. Papa was already crossing himself. Jonel was shaking. He pulled to the side of the road and stepped out, checking the Jeep's front seat. Nothing. No one. We were on a stretch of road surrounded by empty fields. There was nowhere she could have gone. And then, something happened. The pain in my belly stopped. Just like that, the contractions faded. My breathing slowed. The burning weight that had clenched my insides for hours was gone. The hospital said I was still in labor, but it would be delayed. They monitored Jim and me closely. We stayed there for 5 days. Jim was born on Easter Monday at 3:06 a.m. Healthy, strong, but his sugar levels were high. The doctors were concerned. They ran tests. Nothing explained it. On the 5th day, his sugar dropped to normal on its own. No treatment, no intervention. The nurses called it a miracle. Mama didn't. She whispered to me, "That woman was a spirit, and she wasn't trying to help you. She was trying to enter him." I didn't believe her until 3 months later, I saw the woman again. Not in the street, not in the hospital, in my son's room. It was past midnight. I was rocking Jim in my arms, humming softly, when I heard a giggle. Not his. I looked toward the window. She stood there, hair covering her face, hands pressed against the glass, watching, smiling. I screamed. Papa ran in with a BOLO. But there was nothing outside. No footprints, no breeze, just the sound of soft, retreating laughter. After that, Jim cried at exactly 3:06 a.m. every night for 7 days straight. Always the same hour, always the same pitch. It wasn't hunger, it wasn't colic, it was terror. On the 7th night, I stayed awake with him. When the clock struck 3:06, he went rigid in my arms. And from behind the crib, a shadow rose, tall, thin, wearing the same blouse the woman in the Jeep wore, but with a blank face. Smooth, skin stretched tight where eyes and mouth should be. Couldn't scream, couldn't move. The shadow bent over the crib, and then Jim laughed, giggled, reached out his tiny hand. The shadow recoiled and vanished. I never saw her again after that. Some say it was the Virgin's intercession, that Mama's prayers protected us. Others say it was Gregorio, my uncle, who nailed himself again that year and added us to his prayers. But me, I think Jim scared her away, because he knew, because something inside him was older than me, older than her, something that wasn't afraid. And maybe, just maybe, it was waiting for her. They say the souls of those who carry pain too deep don't stay buried. Not on Good Friday, not when the sky darkens, the winds shift, and the land falls into a holy silence. It's the day even the dead pause or rise. It had been a year since my sister passed away. Her name was Tess, and her story was one most people in our barrio had already whispered about. How she was abandoned twice by the same man, how she tried to hold herself together for the child growing inside her, and how in the end she simply let go. They said she died of heartbreak. They said it was suicide. Some said she was cursed. We never spoke about that day. But on Good Friday, 1 year later, I saw her again. Our whole family was out that day, joining the yearly procession in Mahal na Ara. I was supposed to go with them, but that morning I felt wrong. A heavy pressure settled in my chest. My vision blurred. My skin turned cold. So I stayed. I lay in bed, drifting in and out of sleep, as the sound of distant prayers echoed from the church loudspeakers. I remember checking the clock, 3 p.m., the hour of death, they called it. The hour Christ gave up his last breath. That's when it started. I felt a strange twitch in my eyes. My vision jerked sideways like something was pulling it. I couldn't move. My limbs refused to listen. I tried to scream, to call for help, but my lips were frozen, and the house was empty. Then I felt it. Someone or something was holding the edge of my blanket. I tried to tug it, to pull it over my body, but it wouldn't move, as if someone gripped the end tightly. That's when I saw her, at the foot of my bed. My sister, Tess. She didn't look dead. She looked just like she had when she was alive, but pale, softer. Her long hair covered part of her face, and her eyes were distant. She looked like she had been standing there for hours, watching me. I jolted up, gasping for breath. She vanished. I thought I was hallucinating. I splashed water on my face, tried to compose myself, but then I heard it, crying. First, faint, like someone stifling their sobs with a pillow. It was coming from her old room. I froze. The door had been locked since the funeral. My mother never let anyone enter. "Let her rest," she said. "Don't open that room." But the sound grew louder. I crept closer, my body shaking with every step. And as I placed my ear against the door, I knew it was Tess, crying. The kind of crying that comes from a grief so deep, it leaves claw marks in the soul. I stood there, heart racing. Every part of me told me to run, but I opened the door. The moment I did, the crying stopped. The room was dark, dusty, exactly as we had left it. Her framed photos were still on the table. Her rosary still hung by the mirror. Her pregnancy journal, untouched, on the shelf. But the air was wrong. Heavy, cold, dense, like I had stepped underwater. And then, the closet door creaked open, on its own. I backed away slowly, my breath caught in my throat, but I couldn't move fast enough. A cold gust of wind slammed the bedroom door shut behind me, and from inside the closet, I heard her voice. I never meant to stay. It was her, but hollow, broken. I tried to go, but he came back. He found me. I looked at the closet. Something moved inside, something with her voice. But it wasn't just Tess anymore. There was someone else, someone deeper, someone darker. And I realized she wasn't alone. I ran, slammed the door behind me and bolted out of the house. The sun was starting to set, the sky painted with blood orange streaks. I found my mother at the end of the procession, her face pale as if she had seen a ghost. She told me that while they were walking the procession, a man, soaked in blood and dirt, had passed her quietly. It was Christian, Tessa's ex, the same man who had left her pregnant and alone, the same man who had died in a motorcycle accident on the very same Good Friday last year. He had died only hours after Tess, and he had died in front of the church. We never knew what truly happened. Some said he was drunk. Some said he was speeding. Others said Tess called him from the other side. That night, the crying returned. This time, it didn't come from the bedroom. It came from outside the window. I looked through the curtains. Tess was standing under the santal tree. Behind her, Christian, but not how I remembered him. His head was slanted unnaturally to the left, as if it had snapped in the crash. One arm hung lifeless. His eyes were open wide, too wide, filled with a stare that reached beyond this world. They weren't looking at me, they were looking at each other. And for a moment, I saw what they had become. Two souls chained not by love, but by pain, by betrayal, by death. And every Good Friday, their story repeated. One couldn't leave, and the other couldn't let go. They faded slowly into the darkness beneath the tree, and the crying stopped. We sealed her room after that. My mother blessed the house. Priests came. Holy water was sprinkled. But every Good Friday, I still hear her, whispering, crying, asking if anyone still remembers. And every year on that day, I sit by her door, rosary in hand, because if I don't, I'm afraid she'll open it again. They say the saints don't cry for the dead. They cry for the living. And sometimes, their tears aren't just water, but warnings. I was only 10 when I first learned that something sacred could also be terrifying. Our small parish in the province was deeply devoted to Viernes Santo, the Friday of mourning, the day we remember how Christ was crucified. Every family had a role in the church, and for sacristans like me, it was the most awaited and most dreaded day of the year. I had waited for long years to be chosen, and this year I finally was. They called it Pagtatangis ing Mahal na Birhen, the crying of the Virgin, a tradition passed down for generations. After the Siete Palabras, or 7 last words, are read aloud, the statue of the Virgin Mary, dressed in black, is made to shed tears. Not real tears, of course, but it looked close enough. Behind her sculpted head was a hidden hole. A thin, rubber hose ran from a small water container through the back of her skull, ending at her hollowed-out porcelain eyes. By pressing a soft rubber pouch, we controlled the water flow, making it look like Our Lady cried before the altar. It was supposed to be symbolic, poetic, beautiful, but the year I did it was different. The night before Good Friday, I was too excited to sleep. I polished my altar shoes. I cleaned my cassock 3 times. I practiced holding the rubber pouch, making sure the flow of water was gentle, respectful. But when the day arrived, something felt wrong. The sky was too dark, even at noon. The air was thick, humid, like the calm before a typhoon. Thunder rolled in the distance, though there wasn't a single cloud above. Still, we proceeded. By 3 p.m., the church was full. Everyone in town was there, dressed in black, kneeling, praying. And I was behind the Virgin. It was time. The Father looked at me and nodded. I gently pressed the pouch. Water flowed perfectly at first. Thin, steady streams of sorrow poured from the Virgin's eyes. The people gasped in awe. Some wept, thinking it was a miracle. Then I made a mistake. I pressed too hard. Something inside the rubber burst. And instead of tears, a violent stream of water shot out from the Virgin's left eye, like a jet of blood from a wound. The stream hit the crucifix, then the altar, then a woman in the front pew. She screamed. Gasps echoed throughout the church. Lectors paused mid-reading. Even Father looked stunned. And then, the statue moved. Only slightly, a twitch in the neck. I thought I imagined it, but others saw it too. The murmurs began. Someone whispered, "Nagala ong berhen." The Virgin moved. I tried to adjust the mechanism to fix the hose, but when I reached behind the statue, it was hot, not just warm, scorching. I pulled my hand away and looked at my palm. Blisters, raw skin. The statue's body, made of painted wood, was burning from the inside. Then the crying began, not from the people, from her. A soft sobbing sound, raspy and guttural, began echoing from the altar. It wasn't coming from any speaker, not the choir, not anyone. It came from the statue itself. I froze. Father rushed toward me, trying to cover it up with prayers. Ave Maria, gracia plena. But it was too late. The Virgin opened her mouth, which shouldn't move. Carved lips shouldn't part. But we all saw it. Her jaw trembled like she was trying to scream. But all that came out was that horrible, hollow weeping. People rushed out of the church. Some fainted. Some dropped to their knees in shock. I stayed frozen behind the statue, staring at her long eyelashes as they fluttered, as if blinking. It was no longer a symbol. It was alive. After that day, the tradition was never done again. Father claimed it was a malfunction. The statue was removed. They brought it to the convent for repair. But I knew she was trying to warn us, and I wasn't the only one. 2 days later, the woman who had been hit by the water stream at the altar died in her sleep. No symptoms, no illness. Her husband said her eyes were open, and her face was frozen in horror, as if she had seen something before she died. Her daughter stopped speaking after that. No one dared say it was connected, but we all knew. Years passed. I grew older. We stopped attending church on Good Friday. But last year, something brought me back. I was 25. The parish had long stopped using statues during Viernes Santo. But that year, for some unknown reason, the elders decided to bring the Virgin back. Not the same one, they said, a different one. But when I saw her, standing in the center of the altar, I knew it was her. Her eyes were different, painted darker, her lips sealed shut. But it was the same Virgin, the one that cried, the one that burned. I sat at the back pew watching, praying she wouldn't move. But when the siete palabras reached the 7th word, she did. Her head turned directly toward me, slow, deliberate. No one else saw it, only me. Her mouth didn't open, but in my head, I heard her voice. "You failed." Then her eyes wept again. Not water, but blood. I left before the final hymn, and I never returned. Not on Good Friday, not on any day. They say some saints cry because they carry the sorrows of the world, but some cry because they've seen what's coming. I didn't answer the man sitting a few pews ahead. My lips stayed shut, but my hands trembled on the edge of the kneeler. The church, which just moments ago felt like a sanctuary, now held the weight of something wrong. as if the walls were listening, as if the altar was watching. "I asked you something," the voice repeated, still deep, still slow, but now it carried a sharpness, like a rusty nail pressed into skin. "Why keep praying, Rick, if nothing ever changes?" He said my name. I stood up abruptly, the wooden bench creaking beneath me. My breath quickened. My first instinct was to look for the priest, but the confessional was empty. The doors were wide open, the red light off. The entire church, despite the late morning hour, was darker than usual. Not a single ray of sun filtered through the stained glass windows. It was as if the sun hadn't risen at all. I turned back to the man, but the pew where he sat was empty. I scanned the pews around me. Still no one. I was alone, or so I thought. "Your uncle didn't pray for salvation," the voice echoed again, now seemingly from above. "He prayed to forget." I spun around. No one was there, but the air had changed. It was thicker, warmer, like breath on the back of my neck. Then came the humming, a low, guttural hum that seemed to rise from beneath the floorboards. It vibrated in my chest. I looked down. My shoes were trembling on the tiles. And then I saw it, a shadow, crawling, from beneath the altar. It wasn't cast by anything physical. There was no source of light behind it. It was moving on its own, like a stain of ink bleeding across paper. The darkness slithered out and began to take form. Long limbs, thin fingers, a spine arched like a scorpion's tail, and eyes not glowing but a void, like twin holes burned into the air. Couldn't scream. My throat locked. My body froze like it had in the river years ago, when I saw Paul's drowned face beneath the water. "Your uncle saw me too," the thing whispered without a mouth. The sound just existed inside my head. "But he didn't tell you the whole story, did he?" I stepped back. I don't know what you mean." It moved closer, but its legs never touched the floor. It floated, inches above the tile, arms dragging behind like tendrils. "He never told you about the second time." I shook my head. The creature leaned in. Its face, or what passed as a face, hovered inches from mine. I could smell something like rusted iron and wet soil. "The second time he bled, it wasn't for forgiveness. It was for a deal." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the kneeler. I crawled backward until my spine hit the side of the pew. My fingers searched my pocket. The rosary, the one the priest had given me. I clutched it tightly. It felt cold at first, like ice, then slowly it warmed. "I'm not afraid of you," I lied. It laughed. The laugh echoed through the church like wind through a hollow skull. "Oh, but you should be," it replied, "because you're next." With that, it vanished. Just like that. No puff of smoke. No dramatic swirl of darkness. Just gone. As if it had never been there. I was left alone, breathing hard, drenched in sweat, kneeling in front of an empty altar. I stumbled out of the church like a madman. Outside, it was still overcast. The sun hadn't broken through. The air was thick with an unnatural silence. When I got home, my mother was crying. "Rick," she said, clutching her chest. "Your uncle, he's missing." I froze. "He didn't come home after the penitensya," she continued. "We went looking. All we found were his sandals. And this." She held up a small wooden crucifix. It was soaked in blood. I took it. The wood felt warm. "What happened, Ma?" "I don't know. They said the nails went deeper this time. They said he didn't scream. He just stared at the sky and whispered something over and over." "What did he say?" She hesitated. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He said, 'I see the man in black,' over and over, until he passed out." I didn't sleep that night, not just because of the fear, but because I began to remember something I hadn't thought about in years. That day at the river, the day Paul saved me, there was something off about him. Yes, he looked like Paul, but his eyes, they were too white. His mouth never moved, even when I heard his voice in my head. And when he pulled me from the water, I never felt his hands. I only felt cold, like I was being dragged by a current of ice. I opened my journal, one I hadn't touched since college, and began to write everything down. The voice in the church, the shadow, my uncle's disappearance, and a question began to form, slowly, steadily, in my mind. What if the man who saved me and the man who visited my uncle were one and the same? What if salvation came with a price? That night I had a dream. I was in a church, but it wasn't like any I'd seen before. It was upside down. The ceiling was the floor, and the pews were floating in midair. A massive crucifix hovered above the altar, but instead of Jesus, a man with no face was nailed to it. And beneath the altar, a hole, a gaping pit, from which a chorus of whispers rose. They weren't prayers, they were bargains. I woke up with a scream, and outside my window stood a man, wearing black, grinning. They said the last time he was seen, he was walking barefoot down the edge of the rice paddies, blood still dripping from the holes on his palms. His eyes were dry, distant, unmoved by the sharp rocks he stepped on or the stares of the early morning farmers frozen in their tracks. Some tried to follow him. No one ever caught up. I don't remember the exact day we stopped calling him Kuya Derek and started calling him something else. The Man of Wounds, the Bleeding Penance, the Last Pilgrim. Names passed on in whispers during wakes, during late-night drinking sessions, or while lighting candles during power outages. His story became a superstition, but I knew the truth. I saw it happen. I lived it. After that incident with the cult in the mountains and the countless possessions that plagued our family, I thought nothing worse could be waiting for us. But evil doesn't scream. Evil kneels beside you in prayer, answers with your voice, and waits patiently for you to give up. I remember that night, the last time I saw him before he disappeared for good. It was Holy Wednesday. Derek had been quiet for weeks, barely eating, barely speaking, only reading pages from a weathered prayer booklet he kept in his coat. The house was cold that evening, not from the weather, but from something else, like the walls were breathing in reverse. "He's not sleeping," my mother whispered, eyes tired from too many nights of fear. "He just kneels there, for hours." At midnight, I was woken by the sound of hammering. Not fast, deliberate, heavy. I rushed out of my room. My brother wasn't in bed. He was in the old bodega at the back, the one we used to store Santo Niño statues and broken furniture. The door was ajar. He was shirtless, his back riddled with fresh cuts, a hammer in his right hand, a large nail in the other. I screamed. He turned around, eyes glassy, face blank, lips moving in what sounded like Latin, and then he drove the nail into his left palm. I ran toward him, trying to stop him, but something unseen threw me backward. I hit the wall so hard that I blacked out for a few seconds. When I opened my eyes, he was lifting his hand, blood dripping into a metal basin filled with water, swirling like holy soup. He looked at me. "I saw him," he said, voice calm. But he wasn't on the cross anymore. The nails were on the floor. He was standing and smiling. I tried to get up, to shout for help, but my voice was gone. My chest felt heavy. "I'm finishing it," he added. "The penance, the one he couldn't." Lightning cracked outside. A blackout. Only the candle he lit near the old altar flickered against the walls. He stood up and walked past me like I didn't exist. My hands were shaking. I followed him barefoot outside to the small chapel down the hill. The wind howled, but the candle stayed lit. The trees moved, but not with the wind. Inside the chapel, Derek placed his hands on the altar. The air turned metallic. I smelled iron. I smelled blood. Then I saw them. Shadows. Dozens of them. They slithered along the walls, climbed the ceiling, twisted like smoke. But they weren't shapeless. They had eyes. They had mouths. They were smiling. Derek didn't flinch. He raised his arms and shouted something I couldn't understand. The air vibrated. The candles went out. And then, silence. Only his breath. Only mine. Then I heard it. The clicking of nails dragged across the walls. The shadows moved faster. They surrounded him. One of them entered his chest. Another seeped through his eyes. He cried out, not in pain but in joy. "I've been chosen," he whispered. "This is the last time I'll ever bleed." And just like that, he vanished. The shadows too. I was left alone, in the dark. The townsfolk said he was possessed. Some said he had finally become one of them, one of the unholy pilgrims that roamed during Holy Week. Others said he was seen days later in different parts of the province, walking near rivers, appearing during processions, eyes blank but body intact. But no one could ever confirm it. I carried guilt for years, that I didn't stop him, that I didn't burn that book, that I didn't lock that damn bodega. But I also carried something else, a voice. It started as whispers during Lent. Then it grew louder and clearer. I hear it now as I light my candle every Good Friday. It asks the same thing. Will you finish it for him? I haven't answered, not yet, but I know that one day it won't be a choice. It will be a calling, and the hammer will wait for me.